Okay, welcome everyone. Please remember to mute yourself whenever you're not speaking. All slides and links referenced in this webinar will be sent out as we normally do every month. Along with the recording and PowerPoint presentation in the monthly edition of the Light Center PD2Go newsletter, and they will also be available on Spoke. So welcome to the October Y Series webinar, Reducing Teacher Talk Time, Creating Moments for Students. This theoretical session will discuss why we instructors should use our talk time wisely in order to provide students with more time to interact and demonstrate learning. But first of all, I would like to introduce today's facilitator, Dr. Cynthia Azari. Dr. Azari has over 35 years of professional experience in higher education, educational administration, leadership, and teaching, including supervision of college operations and programs, faculty and staff selection, planning, curriculum development, faculty evaluation, budget preparation, and community involvement. Throughout her career, Dr. Azari has taught various courses in leadership and management and brings experience and practical application of management principles to the classroom. She has taught for 9 years here at Westcliff University in the MBA and DBA programs. Dr. Azari has been a collaborative proponent of positively maximizing the teaching and learning environment of the classroom for the benefit of student success. Dr. Azari earned a doctorate in educational leadership from Seattle University, an MS in Industrial Relations, and MA in Educational Administration from West Virginia University, and an BA in Government Secondary Education from Houston College. She and her husband have 2 daughters, a cardiologist, I guess, in New York, and an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles. Oh, how interesting. They also enjoy, of course, their 4 grandchildren. So thank you so much, Dr. Azari, for facilitating today's webinar. And the floor is yours. You can start.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. But prior to all of that, prior to degrees and experience, my family was very poor. We were migrant farm workers in Central California. I've been working since I was 8 years old. I picked cotton, I picked grapes. So what breaks that cycle of poverty? That's what you and I do, education. We help students experience education and become successful. So I want to talk a little bit about how we create those moments for students. And that is through student engagement. So let me ask really quick, what exactly is student engagement? What's your definition of student engagement?
I would say that it's students being on task, really learning actively, being responsible of their learning, feeling support and feeling that they can do it. Like they feel engaged because they're interested in the topic, they feel that it relates to them, and they can actually use them in their daily lives.
Exactly. They're able to take that information, they get involved. And that's where you as a faculty member become actively a part of that involvement, because you encourage that, you facilitate that. So we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of student engagement and talk about creating conditions for student engagement. Interesting how we revert to those student behaviors. So, and usually when I start a class, I have students introduce themselves and begin that dialogue. We don't have time this morning, but I know a few of you, so I may call on you. But we want to show how students benefit from this experience. And actually, the studies have shown that they tend to learn more. I did some research and found that there was an article, or actually a study done by Sedova, and talked about the relationship between classroom talk and student achievement. And I'll talk a little bit about online as well. So what the research has shown is that there's a very strong link between student talk time and achievement. That students who are in classrooms where they talk are much more successful. And that relationship between participation and achievement it applies to all students, regardless of socioeconomic background or gender. There were previous studies that showed that male students tended to be more active in class and more successful. Now we're showing, the studies are showing that all students, regardless of gender or economic background, if they are encouraged to participate. So any comments, any thoughts about student talk time and achievement? Have you observed that? Dr. Anita, have you? Go ahead.
Yeah, so do you mean like the student talk about their achievement based on their grades on the assignment in the classroom?
Well, talk about, yes, but also talk about what's going on. I have observed you, and I know how you involve students by asking questions, by breaking them up into groups. So that's really that participation you encourage. And that's what's so important. Because, go ahead.
Sorry, Professor Constant writes from the chat box, the most distinguished schools have less teacher talk and more student talk.
Exactly. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Dr. Azari, I would say that in my experience of 25 years of education and having done quality reviews and accreditation reviews over 100-ish schools, then those schools that have also received awards from, the state and federal government, they always tout the facts that when you go in and you're doing this evaluation of the actual instruction, it is how are students collaborating together and talking more than the teacher in the classroom. And it's this idea that you are no longer the sage on the stage as the teacher. You're not this like all-knowing, omniscient kind of, I'm going to impart my knowledge on you. It's rather I'm the guide on the side, and I'm encouraging the students to productively struggle together to come up with their own understandings, their own meanings, and then you help elucidate and heighten their awareness of the topics and their connections to those topics because of the expertise that you bring. But it's really about listening to the students and then honing in and using your expertise to make sure they dig deeper. And so a lot of the time that something very simple is like wait time. How are we using wait time effectively to get students to think, pair, share, and then to elaborate more on their initial answers? Excellent.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely right. The most successful classroom and online experiences are those that involve the students, and the faculty member encourages them, guides them, and challenges students, because that's where the retention is, through challenging students and having them experience them. So thank you very, very much. All right, so there was another study that was done that looked at a holistic measurement of student engagement and basically found that there were 4 dimensions: the cognitive, the behavioral, the affective, and the social. I'll talk a little bit more about those, but those were the dimensions that students bring to the institution and to the classroom. And the authors found, or the researchers found, that students basically had to the dimensions were used to encourage students to be more persistent and to encourage retention. And the antecedents, the things that preceded that, as students came into that institution, and as Professor Constant talked about, their students have certain expectations of institutions, and a lot of that has to do with what they have learned about that particular institution. So they come, and I know this looks terrible, but if you look at it carefully, students bring expectations to the institution and to the classroom, and that involvement, those expectations and that involvement, then bring into play the dimensions. They begin to get engaged at different levels. Behaviorally, you see what they're doing. Affective, they have certain feelings that they demonstrate. The social engagement, they're communicating with their colleagues as well, and that cognitive engagement. What are they learning? And then there's several things that are influenced by that, but look at the one at the top. is what Professor Constant mentioned, institutional reputation. And that's very important. It's a very, because our management, if there are any managers here, are always concerned about institutional reputation. I was a community college president for over 20 years, and I understand how important that is. Because, but the fact is that it's the center. It's the students at the center. And that's what brings that transformative learning. That's what brings the student well-being and encourages that self-esteem and self-efficacy. But it also brings the institutional reputation. And I thought that was an interesting aspect because that's so much a part of it. That's why students select these schools. So I want to ask you some questions as we look at different levels of engagement and different dimensions. How do we change the learning environment? How do we promote behavioral engagement? Any ideas?
I guess like bringing even the same topic, but bringing it in a different way. So might be it is more relative to the current situation. I don't say only about case study, but how you present it, just to let them know, let them think and ask a question about what's currently going on. You don't need to share a specific case, but let them bring these cases. So this is, you can connect them with the material and with what's going on around us.
You're absolutely right. My DBA students, I start with what's going on in the world? What are current events? All right, and then how does that impact business? They're DBA students. How does that impact the economy? So I want them to make the connection with recession, with the war in Russia and Ukraine, with cutting off the gas lines to Germany before winter and so on. How is this going to impact business? Because these are business students and they need to understand that on an international perspective. And that challenges them to think and to make that connection. You're absolutely right, Dr. Nanny. You bring that experience to them and you ask them questions about it. Other ideas about encouraging cognitive, affective, or social engagement?
Well, I actually have a question.
That's very
Sure.
good.
Sorry.
Who's with the
Yeah.
question?
All right. The points expressed quite right now are very good, especially when you mentioned also the DBA program. Because in MBA and DBA, people can bring their experiences to the classroom, number one. Number two, what they look for is that how those concepts and theories are translated into action, how they execute them. So I would say they are a lot different than what we offer in undergraduate classes. So the approach that we have, whether it's andragogy or pedagogy, they should be applicable to students, like, for DBA and MBA, you said it. But try to implement that in undergraduate programs. I don't think they will bring the results that we get it from the graduate programs.
Okay, I understand your point completely. Do you have ideas?
Or which one? I teach graduate programs, so I have.
Okay.
So
it's easy. It's easier, isn't it?
That's what I say. But when I teach undergraduate, they have just an open mind. They want to accept everything that's being said in the classroom. And I mean, in other cultures, okay, here we engage them. It's all right. But in other cultures, in China or India, in which we have a majority of our students, the method of instruction is not the same as we have it here.
Sure.
So the engagement is really quite a challenge for them. Because they feel shy even for the language, for the cultural barriers, and a lot of other things. Because over there is a power distance between the professor and the students. Even if we invite them to challenge us, they wouldn't do it. So,
no, you're absolutely right. So what I normally do, because I know I have students from cultures where they come from a very different background, and they're not engaged. Many times I will save 10 or 15 minutes at the end of class. And we've been talking about a particular topic, and I'll say, all right, so I want you to give me an example or something that you've learned that you can apply pertaining to that particular topic. And that way everyone gets involved.
Yes, I do agree. That's absolutely correct. But what I'm saying is that it's not universal. We can't look at that in a benign fashion. It's more complicated, and
Yes.
even the professors have to be trained at the same time with the students. And students should be trained also that this is student-centered, will ask you questions and so forth, because students will say, I came here to learn from the professor. So those are challenges too.
No, you're absolutely right. And my first day in the classroom, all cameras have to be on all the time. You will have a participation grade, and that is determined by the amount of participation. I will have students introduce themselves and make comments, and then encourage them to communicate with their peers as well. You have to set that environment, and you have to continue to promote that, because you're right, it's totally different. But this gives them an opportunity. There was someone else with a question. Was that Dr. Johnson?
Yes. I'm sure many of you have taught in a number of different institutions. One of the biggest differences that I see in the different institutions, and you talk about expectations. I mean, I've been in schools where all the students did all the reading beforehand. You come into the class and they've done the reading, they've done those things. You're presenting that class. It's so much easier to get engagement instead of having to hash out things that they should have been covering beforehand. So how does the school, because you talk about school expectations, you know what, when you go to these bigger schools, you go to Stanford, you go to these other schools, the students have all done they've done all the reading. They've already shown their commitment, rather than there's a certain, somebody mentioned the sage of the stage. Well, it kind of feels like that's their expectation in schools like Westcliff. It's almost because they haven't done the prep beforehand. And that's not just grad level. I mean, even when I was an undergrad, if you didn't do the reading beforehand, you were pretty much crucified in class for that. And how does the school change its reputation? How does the school help set these things, so you're not the lone wolf professor trying to change the culture in that regard?
Any comments? Any responses? How does a school change that?
Good morning. I usually write on my gap, like under the title of the class, that reading the material is 50% of the participation grade. And I do deduct 50%. And I just simply ask them, did you read the chapter, yes or no? That's how I just, it worked for me. I get like about 80% of the people. So the level of engagement between the undergraduate and postgraduate is big. There is usually the undergraduate are so disconnected, they just like very distracted. However, the postgraduate are much more concentrated,
Yes.
much better listener.
There's a comment in the chat box. I appreciate that comment, Dr. Johnson. The school has responsibility. How do we encourage advisors and counselors, for example, to set the expectations? I think that's important, but I like Dr. Baruti's suggestion or practice of actually stating it, saying that this is the expectation and your grade will depend upon that. And did you see a change, Dr. Baruti?
In the first 2 weeks, there is a pushback. By later on, like within the rest of the class, absolutely, I get about 80% reading, yes.
Oh, good. I'm actually going to try that. I like that. All right, other ideas about changing the learning environment so we're encouraging that engagement. Any other ideas?
Hi, this is John Ohashi. I'm teaching my very first class at Westcliff this semester. My background is I'm an adjunct law professor at Western State, which is a Westcliff college. I started this semester with the understanding that there would be this flipped classroom model, and as I found out after the first day of class, no one has read the material, or some are vaguely aware of the syllabus. And so it struck me that the students did not even understand the core topics of each class. And I've discussed this with other faculty and my observer. And the thought or the suggestion is to, again, in continuing student engagement, was to have breakout rooms, but then to have the students basically teach themselves what they should have been learning before the class, and then and in that way, the students will continue to be engaged. But my problem with that is that all we do is we get them to where they should have been before the class started, and I don't. So I'm somewhat at a loss right now as to what to do, and that's partly why I wanted to participate this morning. So does that sound like a viable alternative? The students basically teach themselves what they should have learned before the first day or before the class even started.
I would ask you, is that the best use of your classroom time?
I don't think so. But in law school, the Socratic dialogue is second nature, right? I mean, but to get into a class, I mean, I feel some students, we have a couple of students in the class, which I would, just for lack of a better term, consider them to be A students, because they've read the material, they engage, and there's some insight into the questioning. But for a vast majority, they are there because they got a piece of paper from their advisor that said, this is the class you have to take. And so I want to give them an educational experience, a positive experience, but how do we do that, understanding the realistic constraints that we have?
I think you need to set those expectations very early, like Dr. Baruti. In GAP, he puts that in GAP and set those expectations. These students are in law school?
No. My background is in law.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm saying, is that the Socratic dialogue method in law school is second nature. I am teaching my first undergrad course this semester.
Okay.
And I'm trying to understand how best to use the methods that you're discussing here. The engagement, they totally work with the A students,
right? But
the vast majority of the students have not read the material, and like I said, some are vaguely aware that there's a syllabus.
All right, so go ahead.
Dr. Azari, I was just going to mention, like, very quickly. So, like, in my classes, and even in the classes that I take here at Westcliff, I noticed that students are not prepared, just as the professors have mentioned. That we want to have a flipped classroom. We want the students to come prepared and engaged in the material. And when we realize that they're not, how do we, like, I just ponder, I wonder, how do we, knowing that we want the success of our students, how do we meet them where they're at? Teaching them the skills that they need each session to get better and better, hoping that they'll get to be that engaged kind of student that Dr. Johnson talked about. I mean, they're not Stanford students. So What do we do to scaffold and differentiate instruction for students? How do we help them understand that coming prepared to class is an expectation? It is a requirement of successful students. It's not an easy problem that we would be able to solve today. And it's a problem, I think, across the nation, not just within the institution of Westcliff. But it is something to be said about underserved student populations, which I think that we have a lot of. And I think, as the last professor stated, in undergrad, you might see a lot of those student athletes that are coming, maybe coming to play, or maybe in our graduate programs, we're seeing students that are coming to work, but yet we know they're here. They need to be here. They've at least made a commitment to come. What is it that we can do as a school community together at every level, helping students become, that student that we need to know that that they're successful and that they graduate with with those skills that maybe that they lacked, but we build up. I don't know the answer.
I can tell you, I worked in community colleges for 25 years at various levels, from director to president. And one of the things that we did with athletes was to set up special tutoring sessions, and we call it the zone. So they're in the zone, because for most of these students, it was their only opportunity for higher education. So we had to take advantage of that. But the skill level was very low and they were not prepared. So they were required, as part of their athletic program, to go to these sessions for 5-6 hours a week. And I'm not saying that we can do that, but there has to be some type of setting expectations and providing that supplemental instruction or the assistance. And that's on the part of the institution. I know that with doctoral students, I have the dissertation center now is a huge resource, and I send students to that every week. The writing center has been very, very helpful. I send students to that from the very beginning. And I say, submit your papers to the writing center before you submit them to me. You all are talking about some things that we deal with every day, and I don't have instant solutions. Other ideas?
Yes, I have, in addition to what has been said, I believe that would be very important for all of us to have some kind of what do you call it? This cross-functional training, where the professor sits also with the student services, to those who help the students, and as well with other departments, because I don't think even the other departments know what we do. You are saying everybody's saying really good things, but I don't think the other departments look at it from that fashion. And in fact, students, when they come to class, prior coming to the class, they should know what we do, what the Reich Center is, who the academics department is, what do they do? And for us, you are just educator like us, you know it. This is not only a job, it's a profession based on passion. Yes. We get emotional rewards and psychological rewards from what we do. We don't know, the financial incentives or compensations are not comparable to our qualification. But we enjoy the psychological rewards, but we need support as well. The student services, the records, whatever. So that will help the student to be more disciplined and more dedicated student. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments?
Do you get the idea that sometimes it's the soft bigotry of low expectations for is what happens a lot? And that's why they complain about reading 20 pages as if it's the end of the world. And it's hard to equate, because as an undergrad, we read 200 pages in a week was not unusual at all. And yet, people are just, they lose their mind if you tell them to read. I didn't have time. You didn't have time. You only got 20 pages to read. And you really say you couldn't have, and this is grad classes here.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking for the world, but it's hard for professors to set the expectations that institutions should be doing.
No, you're absolutely right. One of my favorites is, do I need to buy the textbook? What do you mean? You need a textbook. This is a class. And I don't want to belabor that, but students come in with low expectations. If we have low expectations as well, where are we going? I have to set higher expectations. Are they unrealistic? I try not to be, but I have to set higher expectations. If you look at the changes in the syllabi, you'll see now that every chapter, it has 22 pages, 30 pages. That surprised me, because a chapter is a chapter. You've got to read it. But I'm with you, David. This is a long time ago when I was in school. But I still have those expectations that you will read. Do I question them like Dr. Baroudi? I might. But you have to set those expectations. People tend to live up or down to your expectations. That's been my experience. Dr. Ohashi, I would recommend that you set the expectations. Your next class, you set the expectations higher from the very beginning, because you're not serving those A students as you would like. Yeah.
Right.
I would encourage
Well,
you to set them higher. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to experiment.
Okay, good.
We'll see what happens next time around.
Let me see if I can get back onto the topic. This was another study done. They interviewed researchers surveyed and interviewed well over 1,000 students in different institutions in higher education. And they wanted to know, what are your expectations of faculty? What do you want to see? And the students said, we want to see different teaching methods. It's not all just lecture. We want to see different ways of bringing in information, to incorporate those interactive activities with the materials, so that students are actually talking about what's going on in what the topic is and what's going on in the world and how that relates, and getting students involved and asking them, well, what is the impact on business? What is the impact on the economy? Are we headed for a recession? The faculty teach from their hearts. You were selected because of your experience. And I agree with Dr. Sebhatu. You know, the compensation is certainly not the reason I'm at Westcliff. I've been there 9 years because I really enjoy the students that we work with. And it's been meaningful to me. Teach from your heart. That's what's important. You bring that experience, you bring that expertise, share it. I teach management, I teach leadership, and I'm always bringing examples of what I experienced, and then asking what they would do. A group work and project-based activities, for me, it was a lot easier in the classroom. It's a little bit harder online, but the technology has now allowed us to do that. Involve, motivate, and challenge students. Asking them those challenging questions. Well, why do you think that? Or as you present a topic, do you agree? Do you have a different example to share? Those types of things. There are people in the chat box, and I'm not really good. You set high expectations and scaffold and differentiate to ensure that they get there. Good idea. Set those expectations and then scaffold them. Other comments or questions? Back to, I have another one I wanted to share. This one. All right, so this is the Schlechty Center Education Center. And I liked this because I deal with these students. These are levels of student engagement. Professor Ohashi, you have those A students. They're the high attention. They read, high commitment. They want to, not only do they want a good grade, but they want to learn. And so they're prepared. They come into class. And so those students have to be challenged as well. And then the strategic compliance. I want a good grade. I don't care if I learn anything, but I want a good grade. I want to keep my GPA up. I want to get a scholarship and so on. I've had those students. And they can answer questions. They're not really committed, but they can answer questions. The ritual compliance, they come to your class, sit like this. And then you ask them a question. And what do they say? Professor, could you repeat the question? And you honest to God, you think that they are listening because they're just looking at you and they're intently observing the class and have no clue. But they're there. And I have had, as a president and vice president, I have had students complain saying, I was there every day. And I would have to explain, it's not seat time. What did you learn? What were your assignments? What were your papers? But I was there every day. That's strategic compliance. The ritual compliance is where they come and are these the ones that don't turn on their camera? I mean, they come and they don't pay attention at all. Sometimes they turn off their camera. Sometimes they leave it on, but they're not paying attention. The retreat, no attention at all. They come in, they make sure that you get them on the roll, and then they disappear. I've had one student in the last several years, rebellion. Now I don't understand this when you're in an MBA program and you're paying a lot of money for this program. She was clearly rebellious. She came in, turned on her camera, and then immediately turned and worked on another computer or television or something, but never faced the camera. So first time I asked a question, I had to repeat it because she wasn't paying attention. She came and she said, I don't know. And I talked to her after class twice, but the entire semester, the entire session, she's looking at something else. So that was total rebellion. And I didn't understand that. I mean, that's fine for a elementary school, but an MBA program, I didn't get it at all. So how do you engage these students there who are at this level?
This is like if they are not paying attention, this is one level. The other level is if they are distracting, if they are moving, or they are mute and facing the camera, but you know that they are talking to somebody else, right?
Yes.
So at the time I had to, stop because it's distracting to me. It just like it keep me from concentrating. At the time I was saying, hey, let's say Mike or whatever the name is, I'm gonna ask you to leave the class, finish what you need to do, and come back. Okay? I'm not gonna ask him to turn off the camera because he's gonna pretend that he's here. So
Right.
few times it did work. Other times, like the student didn't even come back. But this is what I have done previously.
Okay. It's very, very similar to what I have done. Ask them, go ahead and if you need to take a break, do that, but leave your camera on and come back. You're right. I had a student last spring who had a beer. And as she drank, she became much more engaged. Has anyone ever dealt with that? I'd never had alcohol on an online course. If it had been in the classroom, I would excuse them from the classroom. I sent her a note in the chat box, but she didn't respond. So, but she was clearly drinking a Corona, and she was, but as I said, as she drank more, she became much more engaged. I finally had to move to something else. Any other comments?
Maybe we'll ask the student to drink more during the class.
I actually said, next time you want to drink in class, would you please bring enough for everyone? So
does it help the professor? I think that's the key. Is we can if the professors partake.
Okay, Dr. Anita, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Azari, if we just, for example, for me, I face the same situation. I have students that they are really busy with something else. If I just keep calling them or notifying them or leave the room, for example, I guess this is also maybe distract the other students and just let none of us concentrate. So I will see if we have another options, for example, how we work with them. So I don't want to just stop the class and tell them, please go do what you want or come back. This is distract the other students. So, and even if we deduct the grade, so this doesn't make sense for them. They still do the same thing.
Yeah, the grade really doesn't seem to matter. I agree with you. I will send them a note in the chat box, a private note. Sometimes they pay attention, sometimes they don't. I'm with you. I do call on them and ask them to answer questions. And generally they're the ones that say, could you repeat the question? Because they weren't listening. Or I need to think about that, or I really don't have an opinion on that. Yeah, it is distracting, but again, we have a responsibility for classroom management. A little bit harder online, I think, than in the classroom. Okay, so I looked at a study that looked online, because so many of us teach online, and especially during the pandemic, we all developed skills in teaching online. And so I looked at a study that looked at the different types of teacher talk online. And basically, the ones I highlighted in red, those are the ones that are involving students. You ask questions, you accept their ideas, you challenge them, you maybe ask a probing question, you praise and encourage. That's so important. So no, you're not the sage on the stage, but you truly are a cheerleader. You're encouraging them, and especially when they're going in the right direction, and you can tell that they're being challenged and they're thinking of something else that might apply. But also there's time for lecturing. We all do that because we're sharing information. Giving direction. I normally, because I do have students who aren't familiar with the syllabus, even in the MBA program, I will bring up the syllabus and talk about the assignment for this week. Not read it, but talk about it. If there are any terms I think they don't understand, I will ask, okay, let's look it up. I want 3 of you to look it up. Let's see what you can find. And they'll look on their phones, or they'll look on their computer, they'll look at the textbook, and they'll find an answer. And then we'll talk about that. So they understand the terms and understand the expectations, because APA format, it needs to, you need to have 4 peer-reviewed references. It needs to be X number of pages, all of those things. So it's a little more interactive than just giving directions. I want to make sure they understand. So I check for understanding, because the worst thing is to have them leave and write a paper that's totally irrelevant. And that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, so there's some people in the chat box. Let's see what they're saying. There was a student who was in line for rides at Disneyland. Well, I have had students in interesting places, true. At the onset of any course, setting the tone, mutual respect, and healthy boundaries. That's so important. You really have to set the tone from the very beginning. And I always introduce myself, and I have students introduce themselves and tell me one thing they want to learn from this class. And then if I have 10 or 15 minutes at the end of class, tell us one thing that you learned. Tell us, we talked about this. How are you going to take that and apply it at work or in your life? Try to make that connection. And what the researchers learned, that active and passive students all related to teacher talk. So we are still creating time for students to get involved through our talking. Okay, I only have a couple more minutes. Okay, any questions or comments that you might have?
Not a question, comments. I agree with you. We need to have all the students to be engaged and to respond to our questions, right? But maybe we don't have time. So what I do, I ask them, I need to hear from them orally, but also I encourage them to write their answer on the chat. So we keep a chat, or I create a Google Doc. So from the beginning of the class, anything they can add. And I told them, I consider this also for their participation grades.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. They have access to that Google Doc right there.
Of course.
Oh, good. Good. Okay. Other ideas or comments that you want to share?
Well, thank you very much. This was a good example of engagement, and you facilitated very well. We really appreciate it for inviting our views and our opinions, and that's exactly what a class should be. We really appreciate you for getting us involved. But still, one thing they would say is that students, before they come to our classes, can they get information about everything, starting with the writing center, with the APA style? Shocking, really, when students come to MBA and DBA program and they don't know what APA is. And this kind of things, please give urgent treatment. And this kind of things are very helpful. In the old days, when we're meeting in class, at least we can call them when we're meeting inside. We can call student services, the other departments, to come to class, to lecture for 5 minutes or so. But nowadays, it's online, and it's just us and the students in the wilderness, in the intellectual wilderness.
Exactly, it's just us and the students. So yeah, I have to bring that information from the beginning. Writing center, dissertation center, all the APA format, all of that. I don't expect them to have it. Maybe I have low expectations, but I don't expect them, and I want to set the standards too. So I want to conclude with, it all leads to student learning. You motivate students, we get our students engaged, and that leads to student success and institutional success as well. There is a survey here, and it's in the chat box. So please complete the survey. And I want to thank you for your participation this early morning. And I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asadi, for such a wonderful Y-Series webinar. I don't want to finish this session without, can I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay, because I want to invite you all to the next part of this Y-Series webinar, how to maximize student talk time and improve engagement. During the how-to session, Dr. Hazari will be facilitating also this webinar, and she will be sharing with us tips and tricks on how to engage students and how to make sure that they have the all the possibilities and opportunities in the classroom to speak and to participate and to actively learn. So don't miss it. It will be October 27th. I will be sending the invite very soon.